We're comparing to American kids and Pommy kids. They're the only two, can you believe it? There's no Australian norms for kids. We're one of the objectives one has in life. So, Year 6, Year 7, you can see again that we start to see that there's certainly a pattern change one between each group. Underweight still predominantly with the males. Year 8s, we're finding again there's a little bit of indication that the boys are starting to change shape a bit. You know, all that sort of stuff. So, 4% of kids. But I just want to say, when you're managing a whole range of things to do with health and well-being, that there's a whole pile of stuff you can do. Conclusions, very simply, and effectively the point I wanted to make is that there's no Aussie growth reference charts at all for kids in terms of BMI. There are growth charts, but when we start looking at BMI, which is a universal accepted indice, it doesn't occur. So what we're trying to do then is then look at, okay, how can we look at industry? And again, the sort of software we're looking at with industry tells us that traditionally, and this was a group of blokes in Newman, and this was simply a pass-fail or not applicable, which is the blue one or the grey one, depending where you are. And so you can see that this is a fairly traditional way of presenting the data. Okay, pass-fail, bar graph will be.
What did
Now,
they pass?
chassis.
What did they pass?
Well, yeah, exactly. So what the guys have got is, you know, typical males. We can't think of too many things that are complicated. So chassis means our gut. So what they've done, they've called this a pit stop program. So blokes can't be told that this is the abdominal region. They've got to be told it's their chassis, because all the parts of the car are relative to parts of your body.
Oh.
So your exhaust system is your smoking, whether you smoke, not whether you have a high fibre diet. Your JUCO is skin cancer, and again that was, okay, that's your skin. So again it goes through oil pressure, spark torsion, that's flexibility. So it's just another way of representing a whole pile of health terms. Okay? What we've tried to do, and traditionally the other option you get when you present data to corporates is you get a whole pile of numbers, or B. Yeah, numbers, pass, fail, percentage, all that sort of stuff. So this is the traditional way of presenting data. So what we're trying to look at when we start to manage these people, bingo, here we go again. So we can actually now, within that group of men, when you're trying to manage a whole population, we can actually identify that the chassis or the gut is really clearly where you need to spend your money. Spark plugs in terms of, I think that might have been blood pressure, but the others, this is not applicable because we know that the JUCO wasn't done. The other thing, you'd save money significantly in terms of the programs you actually run. So when you're looking at this sort of application, you can take those very boring tables, get sucked into this sort of software and comes back into something that is a little bit more imposing. And then you can track changes, because each individual can go in and track their own change, feed the information in, and guess what? What you hope to see, of course, is the colours change. So from a management point of view, we start to see some significant things happening. We're going to race through this because what it also allows us to do, a bit similar to what you did earlier, we can actually identify, are there one or two people with lots of risk factors? Now in this case, there's one guy with 5 risk factors, and there are 5 guys with 4 risk factors. So obviously you need to spend a little bit, if you're managing this group, then you start to look quite specifically at the population. And one of the messages that out of today is that the one size doesn't fit all anymore in terms of how we manage health. Okay? Questions on that? We're going to race through this and then we can open up for questions.
Because my interesting one was you said the JUCO, because as we get older, that becomes a huge financial burden
Yeah.
for society.
Massive.
Skin cancer.
Yeah, and they didn't do it on that one.
No, you're dealing with young blokes, aren't you?
Yeah, and we didn't collect the data, we just worked the data up, so it's the data that was actually sent to us. But clearly skin cancer is a major issue with some of these people. Can I quickly talk about the Life Choice Clinic? It's another way of looking at how the Life Choice Clinic has basically been set up since '91, and we've worked with people who are obese and overweight. And we've got an enormous amount of data in terms of the health profile changes. And basically what I'm trying to look at with this is to show you how we can actually work with people in a different way. I mean, what we tend to find, and it's quite interesting how people perceive overweight and health and obesity, because basically people don't want to talk about it. I mean, if you've got hypertension, then we can talk about that. If you've got a crooked back, we can talk about that. But if you're carrying extra weight, don't talk about it. And in fact, one of the challenges we've got is that we're actually looking at people where, you know, effectively, people don't even want to tell people that they're trying to manage their weight. It is one of our primary, risk factors. And so when in managing people where you're in a situation, and it's quite interesting where the perception is, because a lot of the obese, and it's 70% women, 30% men, a lot of the obese people in there would say, inside this fat person is a skinny person just dying to get out. But a good feed of Tim Tams just shuts the bitch up. Like it's one of those sorts of things too, where you've actually got this whole banter going on. And we even know with married women and single women, for example, there's quite a different pattern, because there's quite a bit of research to show that when a single female comes home, she actually goes to the fridge and there's usually nothing there and she goes to bed. Whereas with a married woman comes home, she goes to bed and there's nothing there, so she goes to the fridge. And so you actually have this whole plan of society geared to trying to cope with what's going on. Now, when we started looking at weight, we put pedometers on a lot of our guys, and we had men and women doing 20,000 steps a day. Now again, if you look at the data is actually saying if you all do 20,000 steps a day, the weight will fall off. It's a nonsense. It won't work, because we've shown that people can spend hours walking and not change a gram. Yet the person next to them who spends an hour walking changes shape. So we then started looking at hormonal balance and metabolic balance, because maybe metabolically there's some differences. Now again, when we look at how we manage people, the data tells us, the textbooks tell us, we should all manage people the same way. We all metabolize carbohydrate and fat at rest. Can you remember your basic bio? The rule says 33% carbohydrate, 66% fat at rest. So it doesn't matter what you eat, what you do, then it's going to be the same. We've now done well over 400 of these things, but I want to show you what it looks like. Let me explain this very quickly. It looks like a scattergram, because it is. And the numbers on the bottom tell us the number of people that are actually gone through the test. Can't quite see it as clearly as what I'd like, but the female and male population are indicated by red and green diamonds, telling me how much carbohydrate they burn at rest. Remember, the textbook said 33%. There's the blue line. So, are we the same?
Does it depend on your, your background, where you come from? You
mean West
Chinese
Perth or...
No.
Does that mean that...
I was going to say race, but that's not quite the right...
No, ethnicity.
Okay, ethnicity.
Is that a good word?
Does it depend on ethnicity?
It will depend on a whole range of issues. But what I'm saying is that when we start looking at a sample of 300 people, then when we average them down, and this is one of my fears with all these papers that I read, the average carbohydrate used for females is 31%. The average for men is 41. And bloody hell, have a look at it.
Does that mean that there are some people that don't burn any?
Exactly right. There are some that burn 0 at rest. There are some that burn 100% at rest. It is staggering. And guess what? I can see the level of excitement rising. When we then look at fat distribution, have a go at this. The only thing that is similar between the fat and the carbohydrate is that the scattergram looks very similar. It's spread out like all buckery. So again, we've got people on the bottom line here who burn no fat at rest. We've got people at the top that burn 100% fat at rest. The blue line says where we should be. And in our sample of 340 odd people, that blue line represents 14 people. So when we start managing people in terms of what does it do, we need a system to actually allow that to happen. And unfortunately, when we start looking at some of the metabolic stuff, and I'll sit down here, then we know that we've got people that are just pure fat burners. We've got people who are carbohydrate burners. We've got people who mix it up, so they're 50-50. That's pretty normal. So you've got one of each. So if the individual differences are huge, which clearly our data shows, then the management has to be individual. We can no longer say, just keep walking, eat less. I mean, it's not a bad point to start with, but when you're really dinkum, we need more data to manage these people. And that's where this sensational thing that we've got, and I'm going to race now because